Hey guys, Rob here with 3D Printscape. So today's video is going to be covering how to create a custom Marlin build for the SKR Mini E3 v3.0. I've had a lot of people ask for this video, so I'm hoping I cover everything that was asked for. If not, go and leave a comment below and just point out anything I missed. If I need to update the description or create another video, I can do that as well. It is worth mentioning that some people have had issues with the Marlin build. I'm assuming it's from the configuration file that was used. At least as the starting point. I haven't had that issue. Things seem to be working okay for me, but I did want to point that out in case you are having issues. It kind of goes back to the video I made a couple weeks back covering the difference between the V2 and the V3. The firmware is much more stable on the V2, and there's additional printers that are supported. I know somebody reached out saying like the CR10 wasn't supported on the E3 yet. So just something to keep in mind when you're going through this video. So what we'll end up doing is jumping over to the computer, talk about what firmware to grab and from where, download the firmware in the config example, and then go through the changes that you would want to make if you have a BL touch or filament or an out sensor, just kind of covering some of the basics. Anything that would be more advanced would be a separate video, and like I said, if there's something specific you guys are looking for, go ahead and ping me and I can see what I can do. So with that, let's go ahead and jump over to the computer. But before we do, if you guys haven't already, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks.
Alright guys, so we're here at the computer. Did want to go over a couple things here first. Sorry this video took so long to get out. I was just moving and changing jobs, so I've been really busy between the two. But I should be back to a normal schedule now. And then secondly, I am on a different microphone, at least for this video, because the neighbors are finishing construction of their house, and it is somewhat loud, and this mic doesn't pick up as much background noise. So bear with me if it's not as high of quality as it normally is. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about what software we need first. So the first thing you're going to want to do is download VS Code. That's going to be the editing tool that we use. So I'll put these links in the video description, but you'll go to the VS Code download site and then download the version for whatever operating system you're using, and then you'll run through the installer. So in this case I have Windows 10, so I would download the Windows 10 64-bit here. And then once that's done, you'll go ahead and launch the installer, so just open that and then run through. You have to accept the agreements, and then everything else will be default settings from here. So just go ahead and hit accept, hit next. Like I said, default settings, so you don't need to choose or change anything here. Then hit install. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to actually hit install. So when it's done installing, it will give you a prompt to open it. You can go ahead and open it. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this and launch VS Code. And then once you're in VS Code, there's a couple plugins you want to download. This is going to be true regardless of what board you're working with. So I know this video is focused around Marlin for the SKR Mini E3 version 3.0, but let's say you had a Creality board or something and you wanted to build custom Marlin firmware for it, you would still be using these plugins. So you go to the extensions here, and then the three plugins you want to install are the Platform IO IDE. This is needed to build anything really related to Marlin. So to do that, you just search for the Platform IO here, and then it'll just say install. You'll install it. It'll just walk through everything for you. After that's done, you want to download the Auto Build Marlin plugin. This makes it easier to define what the environments are going to be for the different boards, and it keeps it up to date, as you can see here. I'll talk about this a bit more when we actually do a build. And then this gets downloaded as part of one of the plugins, but if you have a path issue where you start to get errors related to a specific path type error, you can download the Python plugin. Let me just bring that up really quick. And a lot of times you would just install this and it would fix it. Now, installing this doesn't directly fix it because it's not directly related to that plugin. It's just more of a side effect of the install. It does a couple things in the system, and it tends to fix those type of issues. So without going into too much detail on the how or why, if you're having that type of error, installing this will fix it most of the time. Once those are done, you might have to restart VS Code, and then we can go ahead and open our firmware. So let's go ahead and download the firmware. Jump back over to the browser. Alright, then you go over to the Marlin page and go ahead and download the firmware. You can get the stable releases or the most common nightly release, which is what people typically download. So then you'll go here and download this. So you just grab the zip and that will download, and then afterwards you'll go to view download for the configuration, and then I like to just download the entire configuration here. So I just go to code, download zip, and we'll talk about that here in a minute as well for why you need that. Alright, so I do have my 2 downloads here in a folder that I have set up for the firmware. If you notice here, I have a firmware folder right off of the C drive, and then I just have SKR v3 just for a note. You want to have this folder as close to the root of your drive as possible because when you're building on Windows, if the file path is too long, you're going to get different errors related to files not being found, and that's because your path is too long. So if people download into the downloads folder and just extract it and don't move things around a little bit, I've seen people run into that issue quite a bit. So we'll go ahead and just extract this. And then you see here it nests the Marlin firmware inside another folder. So what I like to do is just cut this, bring it up one directory and paste it, and then just rename it to Marlin. So just go to rename and get rid of the rest of that. That way you have a short extension or short file path and you don't have to worry about it. So now we'll go ahead and extract the configuration files. We'll use those as our starting point, so just extract all. Alright, then we'll go ahead and open that folder. This is really just the configuration examples. It gives us the starting point, so we'll drill into it and go to examples. Then we'll go into Creality, and we're going to be using the Ender 3 Pro here as an example, so I'm going to go into that. And then we'll go to the BIQU Tech SKR Mini E3 3.0, and then we want to copy these 4 files and put them into our Marlin folder. So go into Marlin, and then go into Marlin again. So just go ahead and copy these over. And you want to replace the existing files. So that gives us the base configuration and our starting point. Now let's talk about what configuration examples they have for the 3.0 board really quick. Most of these don't have them. You can go through, and if you're really good with Marlin, you can make it work with most of the boards that it will support or can be installed in. But if you go into Creality, I believe the main ones they have examples for are the Ender 3 Pro, like we were just in, and the V2 has it as well. But none of the CR10s or anything have it in there at all. So they're just base examples. So if you have a CR10 and looking to use this board, at least for the time being, you're going to have to modify a config example from one of the other ones. I would start with the one for the Ender 3 Pro and then make the necessary changes. The board is pretty much the board would be the same, and the connections are pretty much the same. So most of the changes are going to be around the size and such. If I get some time, I'll see if I can make a couple working examples and then post them out somewhere for you guys. I just don't have a CR10 to actually test on, but I know a couple people in the community did bring up the fact that they don't have config examples for it for the CR10. So I wanted to mention that here. It's also worth noting that like the Ender 5, it doesn't have anything in here for it either. But if you go to BIQU Tech's GitHub repo, they have support for the Ender 5 Pro and the Ender 6 here, so you can go into there and get the configuration examples or just download the pre-built. But it is interesting that they have it on the BIQU Tech page and not on the config examples for Marlin. I expect that to change soon once more people start using this board, but that's kind of where we're at so far. So if you have one of the common printers like the Ender 3 Pro and stuff, you'll be able to follow this process. If you have one of the other printers, and they don't have a config example yet, you're going to have to mainly do everything I do here, but there'll be other changes you'll have to go through, and those might vary based on the printer, so I can't cover them all in this video, but a lot of them are going to be around the name, the actual build plate size, and that kind of thing. Alright, so let's go ahead and go back over to VS Code and open our firmware. So we'll just go back up here, go to open folder, and we'll go ahead and go to our firmware folder. So just go to C drive, firmware, and SKR v3, and then Marlin. Alright, so this is one thing I wanted to mention because this has come up quite a bit, where people go into the second Marlin folder and then open this, and they make their changes to the config file, and then they say they don't have the build button at the bottom of the screen, which I'll show you here in a second. The reason is you don't have all of the files that are needed. You have to open the first Marlin, or whatever you end up renaming it to. You're looking specifically for the folder that has this platform io.ini file in it. If you're not opening a folder with this, you're not going to have the build button. Alright, so let's go ahead and open everything up here. And then one thing I like to do at the beginning before I make any changes is I like to do a test build. This just makes sure that everything is building the way I would expect it to before I make any changes. That way I know if there are any issues, it's not related to the changes I made, it's related to something else. So what we'll go ahead and do now that this is open, just go down to the auto build plugin, go into the panel here, and then we would just go ahead and build this. So we'll go with the top one and hit build. And then once it's built, you can go ahead and open this folder to get to where the .bin file is going to be. You can see here, open that up for you. All right, now a couple things to point out really quick. So, like if you're building the 422 example, a lot of times I've had an issue where it fails the first time, and then if I hit build again, it will be successful. And sometimes I also have to clear out the .pio folder. So if you go in here, you can delete all of this if it fails, and then go ahead and build it again, and it should work. It's just, I don't know what actually causes it to fail on occasion, especially on the first build, but sometimes it does. So just keep that in mind. All right, so let's go ahead and close that, and let's go ahead and make some changes. All right, so let's go ahead and go up to Explorer, go into Marlin, and go to our configuration.h file. So what I'm going to walk through here assumes you have a BL Touch or CR Touch connected to the board as well. If you don't, you can skip the steps that are related to that. I'll make a note of what they are, but a lot of people who are going through this process do have one of those, so I wanted to make sure that this is really covering that. And another thing to point out, this also assumes that you have your Z-Stop connected, and either the CR Touch or BL Touch plugged into the BL Touch port on the SKR. All right, so let's go ahead and search for what we want to change. To bring up the search function, just hit Control F. I've had some people ask about that. And then search for Z_min_probe and go down to here. So really what we're looking for is zmin probe, use zmin. We want to make sure that this is commented out. You would only uncomment this if you were connecting the BL Touch pins to the Z-Stop, but we're not doing that. And then we want to go down here to use probe for Z-homing and uncomment that. Next we want to search for BL Touch. And again, these settings here are specific to the BL Touch and CR Touch. To the board, they are the same thing, so if I only mention one of the names, it applies to both. So we'll uncomment that. And then we want to scroll down to where we enter our offsets for the X and Y. There are some default ones here. These might be accurate for whoever did these config examples, but last time I measured, I had -44 and -7. And then I set this to 0 for the Z, because I set the Z offset over in the actual printer. I don't really make any adjustments here. I mean, you can measure it and set it here. You'll still have to make the offset adjustment at the printer, so I just do it all there. But that's up to you. Next, we want to search for auto bed leveling by linear. So auto_bed leveling. And then we want to uncomment this, and then we want to comment out mesh bed leveling. Then we'll search for Z-safe homing, and then uncomment that, and then search for EEPROM_init, so EEPROM_init, and we want to uncomment this. So what this does is it clears the EEPROM on first boot after a new build, so you don't have some random issues where the EEPROM needs to be cleared out before it fixes any of the settings. This will just take care of it for you the first time the firmware is updated. Then lastly, we want to search for min software, and then go down to end software and stop Z. We want to comment this out. If you don't, by default, it's not going to let you adjust your Z offset below 0, and you'll have to disable it using a G-code command. It's M211S0. That will disable it if you wanted to leave this enabled. I know some people recommend leaving this enabled and then just using the command. It's technically safer because you won't accidentally go below 0. But in my experience, it's just been more of a pain to do it that way, and I prefer to just comment it out in the firmware. Alright, then a couple other things really quick. These are more optional, but if you're somebody who has like the extended bed kit, you want to change the bed side, it's going to be this value here, x underscore bed underscore size. And you have the x and y values. You would change those to 300, assuming that was the kit you had. Then the last thing I wanted to point out in the configuration.h file before we jump over to the configuration underscore advanced file is the grid size here. So by default, this put it in a size of 5. The typical size that is defined for the Ender 3 is 3, so I would probably change it back to 3 unless you have a really warped plate, because it's just going to take longer to create the mesh, but it's going to multiply that by itself to create the grid size. So 5 is going to be 5 times 5, so it's going to have 25 points that it probes, where 3 is going to have 9. Alright, let's go ahead and jump over to configuration advanced file and search for probe offset wizard. You want to uncomment this if you have a BL touch. Basically this makes it easier to set your offset. I have a video covering this, so if you have specifics about that, it'd be worth checking that video out. And then if you want to see the percent complete, we need to uncomment something else, so we'll do search for show underscore SD, and then uncomment this. And then that's going to show the percent complete, versus if you leave that uncomment, it's just going to be a blank spot on the screen there. And then if you wanted to show remaining time as an estimate as well, you can search for show underscore remaining, and then you can uncomment this out, and it will show both. And if you have both, you can also uncomment this if you want, and it will rotate between remaining time and percent complete. I don't like that. I like to just leave this uncommented, but you can. That's something you can play around with, really. Alright, so with that, we'll go ahead and try to build this. So go back over to our plugin, go in here, go ahead and clean up the existing build. That's basically just deleting everything in the .pio folder, and then go ahead and hit build. Alright, now that that's done, we'll go ahead and go to where our firmware is at, and then we will copy this firmware.bin file and put it on our SD card. I don't have the SD card on the computer right now, but it's really just you copy it from here, paste it on the SD card, and then to actually put it on the printer, you will just insert the SD card on the printer, power on, and it should pull that off. And then the easiest way to check that it did would be to search in the menu for anything related to BL Touch. If you see that, you know that it pulled in the firmware. And then lastly, if you have a BL Touch, you want to add the G29 command to Cura. I'll show you that really quick. It's not really tied to this video, but I'll do that really quick as well. Alright, so in Cura, regardless of the version, you go to Preferences, Configure Cura, go to Printers, choose your printer, and go into Machine Settings, and then under the Start G-code, you'll see the G28 command here. Under that, you would just create a new line and put G29, and then you can put a comment here. It's just a colon space ABL. It's a comment. It's not required. But that will start the grid at the beginning of each print so that you have an accurate grid. I know some people say it's not needed. I personally just do it anyways. It adds an extra minute or so to your print, but you know things are going to be accurate based on the current state of the build plate. Things get shifted around if you move the printer around and stuff like that a lot. So I personally just add it, especially for longer prints. It's not worth the risk. If you have the ABS set up, you might as well use it, in my opinion. But that's really all there is to it. If you have any questions about what I covered or would like me to go into any detail on anything specifically, just go ahead and let me know. You can reach out in the comments below or join us on Discord. Thanks.
Alright guys, so that covered the process of creating a custom Marlin build for the SKR Mini E3 v3.0. It's not really much different than any of the other Marlin builds. but I did have a lot of people ask for it, so I wanted to make sure we covered it. If you have any questions about what I covered or would like to see anything else, please leave a comment below or join us on Discord. And if you would like to see any other configuration changes added to these types of videos or my firmware on my website, go ahead and reach out and let me know. I'm always willing to make changes, looking just to improve as we're going along, so any feedback is welcome and appreciated. Thanks.